A neighbor is outside his home, located approximately 1/3 of a mile from the location of the attack, enjoying the 59 degrees crisp Florida night air. He hears what appears to be a faint voice off into the distance, pleading for help. His eyes struggle to adapt to the pitch darkness, and in his wildest imagination, nothing would prepare him for what he sees next. Stopping in his tracks to listen more intently, a dark figure emerges from the woods, walking slowly towards his house. In the most gruesome seconds of shock, he continued to watch as Audreanna walked with her hands in a reaching motion, begging for help. She would eventually make her way to his porch, taking a seat on the chilly porch steps, unable to lower her arms. Moments later, EMS would arrive and begin to render aid to the critically injured Audreanna. EMS could do little to remedy the insufferable pain, agony, and burns that had impaled most of her body. EMS personnel would later testify that this was by far the most gruesome burn case that they had ever seen, also accompanied by severe head trauma. The EMT would also testify that the extent of the burns prevented them from providing adequate medical assistance to Audreanna. Instead, they stabilized her and prepared her for transport. Any such contact with her already charred skin would result in her skin being rubbed off onto his gloves. Experiencing the most dreadful attack imaginable and not immediately succumbing to her wounds, Audreanna remained conscious and alert long enough to identify her attackers and asked EMS to send help to protect her children. What the trio thought would silence Audreanna would prove to be their own quietest defeat. She would tell EMS personnel a harrowing tale straight out of a horror movie, detailing how Tina, Brittany, and Heather drug her from Tina's trailer, forcibly placing her in the trunk of Tina's car and driving to a dark wooded area not far away from the mobile home park. She struggled but explained that after Tina and Brittany beat her merciless with a crowbar, they tased her with a stun gun. Tina would then douse her with gasoline, setting her ablaze. She was able to identify each of her attackers by name. Police would quickly discover the crime scene and secure evidence items such as Brittany's pair of white shoes, a stun gun with blood on the handle that matched Tina's DNA, paper stained with Audreanna's blood, an orange, gold, and black hair weave later matched to the missing hair weave from the back of Tina's head, a crowbar, and a pool of blood that matched Audreanna's DNA. Shortly after the attack, and after locating the crime scene, law enforcement officers apprehended Tina and Heather and transported them to headquarters for questioning. Tina's husband, Darren Lee, would also be summoned for questioning. The interrogation spanned hours into the night of the attack, with police sifting through ranges of emotions and tall tales of innocence and denial of any form of culpability. The first round of questioning would include Darren Lee, Heather Lee, and Tina Brown. Police would apprehend Brittany early the next morning from the trailer after she returned from her visit to the hospital. Darren Lee, Heather's husband, presented an almost comical narrative of his answers to questions posed by the detectives. It's simple, he says. He wasn't there, doesn't know anything, but admitted to having slept with both Tina and Audreanna, and had other tenderonies in his little black book. He laughed about his involvement in the love triangle between his wife Heather, Tina and Audreanna, but says he had nothing to do with the attack and was seemingly being forthcoming about what he knew about the goings and comings of the girls on the night of the attack. It was clear that Darren didn't want any trouble with police, something that he was pretty familiar with from his past deeds. And although Darren wouldn't win the Husband of the Year award, police found no damning evidence to involve Darren in the murder. Unlike her husband, Heather spent most of her interrogation sobbing and denying any responsibility and seeking to fruitlessly persuade the detectives that she would never hurt Audreanna, rather was her friend and protector. Heather's Paul Bunyan stories of guiltless, sin-free involvement painted a picture opposite of the laundry list of facts that was rapidly stacking up against her. Crying and repeating that she had seen Audreanna that day and that she was going to help Audreanna make it back home to see her mother, Heather only implicated Tina and Brittany, and she spent hours denying ever laying a finger on Audreanna, refusing to self-incriminate herself, of course, and eventually asking for a nurse to help with her escalating anxiety that had been brought on by her criminal fight or flight mode ultimatum. Tina's original stance presented a quiet and cold demeanor. After sitting alone in the cold, sterile police interrogation room and left alone for a considerable amount of time, Tina put her arms inside her shirt as if to keep herself warm. When questioned about the attack on Audreanna, Tina made declarations of loyalty, calling her one of her best friends. Tina's intermittent tears, denial of any involvement, and attempts to deflect any blame were followed by her dropping what she thought was the neighborhood bombshell, telling the detectives that Audreanna was sleeping around with everyone in the mobile home park and had a lot of enemies. The police were very familiar with the allegations and the conflict between the neighbors, telling Tina that they were aware of the rumors, then redirecting Tina back to their original line of questioning. Police would hit a brick wall with Tina, who embraced her version of innocence and removed herself from any guilt. She also declared her daughter Brittany's innocent, saying that my baby wasn't involved with none of this. Clearly terrified that her daughter Brittany would break under the pressure of the interrogation and divulge the facts of what really happened, Tina was in full panic mode. Strangely enough, Brittany spoke to detectives in a humble and almost whisper-like manner. Using her self-effacing and inside voice, she denied ever even having any serious disagreements with Audreanna and says that she couldn't even recall the significance of what the disagreement was about. She denied having left the trailer on the night of the attack and says that she was at home all night with her friends, dancing, listening to music, and watching movies. That is until she hit her hand on the door to her room in her attempt to catch the keys that her friend had innocently tossed to her. After hurting her hand, Brittany claims that her mother directed her to drive herself to the hospital for medical assistance. Police would determine that Brittany's finger was indeed fractured, but not because of an innocent childish mistake, but because Brittany injured her hand while viciously striking Audreanna during the ambush. The police would come up short in their attempt to get Brittany to admit any involvement in the attack, but they knew that Brittany was at the forefront of the scandal, and although Brittany was able to escape being arrested the day of the interrogation, it was certain to happen given the incriminating trail of evidence left behind at the crime scene by this anything but savvy trio. Maybe some people may feel compassion for Brittany, others not so much. But you have to ask yourself how Brittany, at only 16 years old, became so misguided and devoid of a conscience. Most girls her age are busy dancing and laughing at TikTok videos, not being the focus of an investigation of an attack designed to banish someone from the face of the earth. After being interrogated, the trio would be released while Audreanna was still alive and hospitalized. During that time, court records show that Tina confided in a friend and several family members that the trio had beaten Audreanna, forcing her into the trunk of Tina's car, setting her ablaze and not looking back, leaving her to die. According to police, in a final attempt to silence Audreanna, Tina's actions would surpass ruthless and unconscionable as she callously sought to finish the failed attempt to end Audreanna's life. Court records show that Tina sought to garner her friend's assistance in what she called finishing Audreanna off. Her friend would later testify that she declined to get involved in Tina's deadly plot and instead reported her to police. This provided police with additional evidence against the trio, who were rearrested on April 9, 2010, and held without bond. Audreanna would succumb to her wounds, leaving her two children without the mother that loved them so much. The interrogation of the quad were damning, rendering the judgment of lengthy prison sentences for all involved. That is, except for Darren Lee, the ungraceful Casanova of the trailer park. For luring Audreanna into her home under false pretenses, beating, shocking her with a stun gun, kidnapping, transporting her to the scene of the crime, and setting her on fire, Tina was sentenced to death. Tina has since appealed the death sentence, which was unanimously upheld, and she was denied relief from the death penalty and remains on Florida death row, accounting for a total of 3 female death row inmates. Seeking some semblance of compassion for her brutal and dysfunctional childhood upbringing, Brittany pled no contest to her role in the murder and was sentenced to life in prison. However, after a Supreme Court ruling made it unconstitutional to give juveniles an automatic life sentence, Brittany was granted a new sentencing hearing in 2017. However, Brittany was once again sentenced to life. Short of a supernatural phenomenon, Brittany will spend the rest of her natural life in the Florida State prison system. Heather's involvement in the murder plot remains largely questionable. According to Tina and others that Heather allegedly admitted her involvement to, believes that Heather was equally vested in the murder of Audreanna. But, as with most who accept a plea bargain, she testified against her ex-friends Tina and Brittany and was given a reduced sentence of 25 years in the Florida State prison system. Heather is scheduled to be released in February of 2032.